Good morning and welcome back to Rusty Metal Wrench. In this episode, I'm going to close out the building of the Clay Spencer tire hammer. I, for all intents and purposes, have it completed. Really, there's nothing left to do on it except for maybe some minor tweaking if I feel it's necessary, and building some more tools for it. But to pick up where I left off on the last video, there was a few points I needed to kind of revisit. Of course, you can't see it with the screen in the way, but we'll try to come back here. The big one I noticed was the spring cups that I made, and I'll put a picture up somewhere. I pointed out that I had built up a little bit of a corner inside there to give it some added strength. Normally those fillets add some strength, keep stress cracks away, and so on. The problem is, with the spring, it's flat ground on the ends, and therefore there is a flat shoulder. That spring cup did not fit inside of the spring very well. It kind of rocked there and added a little bit of dimension to it. So I had to take it back to the lathe and put a bit in backwards and actually turn those down to fit the spring better. And once that was done, everything else worked out really well. The only other thing I had to do was, I don't know if you can see it here, but I had to put a bit of a bevel on the outside edge to clear the arm. And again, the spring guard is in the way to show you that. But it's pretty basic stuff and just kind of a heads up. Another issue I ran into was the alignment. I spent a significant amount of time making the tool and the jig and all that to align everything. I did it according to Clay Spencer's plans and ideals. This jig here is parallel here to here, easily under 1/1000th of an inch. It's probably closer to 3/10 of 1/1000th of an inch. And that's the alignment jig from your anvil to the hammer. So basically, before you weld the hammer guide tube to the hammer guide column, or whatever you want to call it, you put that jig in there so that there's no way that can be misaligned. As much time as I spent putting the frame together, making sure this and its 4 holes were lined up to the column as much as humanly possible, somehow it ended up being a slight bit off. It was a bit twisted this way, if I remember correctly. It wasn't terrible. It was probably less than a degree and a half, somewhere in there. But it was enough to make me scratch my head and go, I wonder what happened there. Also, the anvil kind of ended up maybe leaning a little bit that way against the column, or the column ended up running the other way for it. It was something where they weren't exactly perfect with one another, and that kind of left me at a crossroads. I had to figure out whether I was going to cut out the weld at the base on the anvil and reattach it properly. Well, I say properly, but reattach it in a more perfect orientation. And then I really had to sit and think about it for a while, because the measurements that I had once I got everything tacked up and I was ready to put the hammer guide tube on, they weren't significant. They were, I don't want to say concerning, other than the fact that they weren't perfect. And that's more my thing, not necessarily something that I would tell people need to be super concerned with. But in the end, the hammer tube is a tiny bit skewed. I think it's this way to the column, which meant I had to kind of cut this at a slight angle to counter that. And then the slight lean, or whichever one it was, the column or the anvil, I don't know which one it was, but one of them was leaning not the same as the other one. So when I had to put the cap on with the stub axle, I had to shift it over away from the camera, that direction, roughly, I don't know, it was like 3/8 of an inch. It wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't perfectly centered. The only reason I bring it up is, basically to let you guys know the hammer build can be done. I had quite a few advantages, basically a full machine shop, all the experience I've had, double checking and triple checking everything, make sure things are lined up, and I still had issues with it. But all that to say, even if things don't go exactly right, you're not screwed. Like I said, I had to weld that the stub axle a little bit off center and a little bit of a slight twist to counter whichever one was twisted. And fingers crossed, got everything wired up and plugged in and put together, and it worked fine. It absolutely worked amazing. I guess I don't want to say they built in a deliberate tolerance for error, but the plans are very forgiving in that sense. I'm not saying don't try to get it perfect. I'm just saying if you don't get it exact, it's not the end of the project, and you don't have to necessarily do anything crazy to counteract if you're off just a tiny bit. Anyways, so that was my big trial during the build, was countering that and taking a day or two to kind of calm down and think about it and figure out how I wanted to do it and reassess. And everything ended up just fine. Hammer works great. Anyways, moving on, the parts we haven't talked about yet. My floor, if you can see, I've got cracks everywhere on the floor. That's just how the garage came, and I really don't have any way of countering that. And given that and the possibility of eventually getting a bigger shop with a better floor, I really didn't feel like digging out the concrete, cutting the concrete out, digging out a new foundation just for the hammer, and burying anchors in it, and so on and so on. So I made a platform. It's 24 4-foot 2x4s. I just cut them in, 8-foot 2x4 in half. I gang glued and screwed 6 of them at a time. So I have 4 individual blocks of 6. And I mounted those 4 to this piece of plywood. It's 3/4 inch ply on top of a 3/4 inch stall mat. And mounted, I ran some bolts, I ran some T-nuts on the back side of the platform, and then ran some all-thread through there, and then ran some nuts and some feet, keepers, so to speak, on that. I've used the hammer maybe, an hour and a half, 2 hours. Those haven't come loose. Couple small things have worked loose. I've had to retighten the bolts for the dies and everything, but nothing major, and definitely stuff I was going to be checking anyways, just because that's the nature of the beast. So the platform works really well. The wife hasn't complained too much. Neighbors haven't said anything at this point, but then my nearest neighbor is 200 feet away, so probably not going to hear much about it. I have yet to fill the tubes with sand. I've got access holes here, and then one in the back of the column up high, so I can actually, way in the back, fill it with sand at some point. Just got to get a big bag of sand from Lowe's or Home Depot, and I can start funneling it in there. Wiring-wise, I was originally going to go with a better motor, and better being a more, quality motor. I ended up getting one from Vevor off of Amazon, only because Amazon threw the 25% off sale at me It popped up on my front page of my Amazon. Oh yeah, previous item looked at. Check this out, 25% off for the next 12 hours. And I couldn't resist. It was less than $200. It's a 2 horsepower motor, fit all the requirements listed in the plans and the parts list. And I decided to go ahead and take a chance. It seems to be working. It's a little bit noisier than I think another motor might have been, but that doesn't bother me anyways. I went ahead and opted for this kind of on-off switch. It's a very positive click when you hit each one. Definitely, it's turning on when you hit the button, and it definitely stops when you hit the stop button. I like that better than a toggle. A little bit less chance of inadvertently bumping it on when you don't want to, that kind of stuff. I don't know where this came from. It was just some kind of cover I had in my parts pile. I was trying to figure out if I wanted to do an electrical box or not, and I just happened to find this in my pile of miscellaneous stuff, and it just happened to work. All I had to do was mill out the holes for that and drill a hole for that. And this is, as you can obviously suss out, is a counterclockwise clockwise switch. In different discussions, I think even in the instructions, Clay mentions changing the direction once a year just to keep everything kind of wearing evenly and uniformly. And I figured that was a simple way to do it while I was at it. The only thing it added as far as work and money goes, not even money, because the wire I had in my wire box, I had to run an extra thing of wire. I think it was 4 conductors up to here. So power comes into here, goes to the switch, comes out into this, comes up to here, connects with a couple of the wires in here and a couple of the wires in here. Then these 4 wires come out, get flipped around, and come back into here. And it just works. Everything works just fine. The dies were, I'm going to say that was interesting. I had confidence that I could make that happen, but it got interesting. The instructions call for you to heat it up to 1200 degrees, and I think it went to 1650 degrees or something like that. That I didn't have a controlled way of doing it other than the forge, and that was a little difficult, if not sketchy. But I was able to get the temperatures and soak them for a long time, and that was after welding. I got the die blocks up to about 400 degrees prior to welding the bases on them, and if I was going to do it differently, I did have a little bit of a trouble because I had kind of clamped the 2 die bases together back to back with bolts and nuts to kind of keep them from twisting on each other when I welded, because it was going to be a lot of heat into that weld to make everything stick, and that didn't afford me all the access I wanted. So the welds are, with all the clamps and everything, the welds are kind of not my best work, but so far they're holding. But anyways, once the welds were done, I threw it immediately in the forge. I didn't have any problems with the bases warping. Everything seemed to work out really well. Did my temperatures as best I could. I soaked them. I even took another piece of metal and got it red hot, and I dunked it into my 5-gallon bucket of used oil. I know people will have their comments about that, but I do it outside. I don't do it in the shop. I do it well away from the shop. And I make sure I know which ways the wind's blowing and all that. So I know, not the best, but it's what I have. Anyways, I preheated the oil to 150 as per the instructions, and I dunked the first one in, and it took forever. I mean, it took 20 plus 30 minutes, something like that, to get it down below the 200 degrees so I could start the tempering. The window is under 200 degrees. You want to quench it until it's under 200 degrees, and then once you hit that, do not let it get below 100 before you throw it in the oven and temper it 400 degrees. So I dunked the first one in the oil. It was already 150 degrees. That oil never got below 220 after I dunked the piece in. So I settled for getting it to where it was just kind of stable. It was like 220, 230. I pulled it out, set it on a block of wood, and just let it kind of air cool while I did the other one, and kept track of both of them with the infrared thermometer. And once they both got to about, I think that one was 200 and this one was about 180 or 175 or so, I took them both in and put them on a piece of foil and put them in the oven and left it at, I think I put it at 420, because 400 was leaving it a little bit shy of 400 degrees. It was only getting it to about 380. So I put it about 420. I overshot a little bit, just a few degrees, and left it in there for about 4 hours. And then everything worked from there. My first die I made, or top tool, is just a piece of mild steel. They're all mild steel, but you can see where the die got a hold of. I got a hold of the edge of the die with the flatter, and you can see where the hammer's kind of been knocking on the top corner there. But I gotta tell you, there is not a single mark on that die, either one. It hit that cold steel, and it knocked the cold steel, but it did not do anything. It's just as smooth as the day that I tempered them. They're basically brand new still. So obviously something worked right. The discussion is that 4140, which is what is called for, is fairly forgiving as far as the hardening and tempering process, and I'm proof of that if that's the case. So anyways, so wanted to bring that up and point that out, because that might be a little bit tricky for some people if they don't have the means to do that. As far as troubles and tribulations, I really can't say I've had any. Once I got past the correcting or accounting for the misalignment, the subtle misalignment, I'll leave it at that because it wasn't as terrible as I originally thought, but everything seems to work just great. I'll throw up some footage of me hammering on it with some red hot metal for the first time, and let you guys see that. At some point, I'm working on a die saddle clamp for this, but I'll come back to that in a different video, and as well as I'll address the tools later. But I do want to go ahead and point out, I did that on the power hammer, not the curve. I did that on the anvil, but flatting that end of that 3/8 bar, all that was, if you can see in there, let's see if it'll focus. Yeah, you can see where it kind of got flat on the top there. But the first one I made was one of the flatters. Then I took the rod and I put it in there with the flatter kind of overhanging. That pushed the flat down and left the round kind of intact. And I was able to flatten out that 6 inches of bar and clean up the edges, and then take it to the anvil and bend it up so I can make my my top tool out of that. It blew me away how quickly that hammer made that job go. I ended up doing, I think it was 12. Is that 12? That's, yeah, roughly, that's 11, something like that. Those 11 tools, flattening the last 6 inches of that bar and then cleaning up the edge, that part alone, it took me longer to heat those up than it did to actually do all of them on the hammer. Once I got past the first one and figured out, oh, okay, this is how it works, it went so fast. That thing makes short work of those kind of jobs, and that's exactly what I bought into the plans and making the hammer for. So anyways, if I haven't gotten to it already, I'll throw up some videos of the red hot metal, and we'll take it from there. Otherwise, I will come back with another video with the different tooling and stuff I've made for it, and some other footage. Thanks much, guys. Have a good one, and we'll catch you next time.